Hi, Liv.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay, Dickon?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Brilliant and fantastic. And how am I supposed to follow Colin when I'm sat at my desk? But I will try and bring exactly the same energy Colin has brought, and he absolutely has articulated the compelling case of why. So really, by way of my introduction, I just wanted to share some further insights into why us together. And hopefully that's a theme that runs through today. And I'm so sorry I can't be with you in person. I really genuinely wanted to be. But this, what a fantastic opportunity we have, this inaugural event coming together of ECOWind and the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme, and really focusing on impact. Because with all of that why, we need the impact. And it's events like this today that bring peers together across government, industry, academia, that really, I think, remind us of the importance of collaboration across sectors, given the complexities and the interdependencies of the topics we work on. And I really am a strong believer of collaboration and consensus, and we need those things to see the impact we want out of these programs of work. So as my role, my name's Olivia Thomas. I head up marine planning at the Crown Estate. And I'm constantly reminded of the rising and increasingly complex number of demands being placed on our seabed. And they're not always easy to notice when you look out at sea. I live on the North Kent coast. I head to the beach for my moments of serenity. And we look out at this quite unoccupied space, and we know the reality is very different. We know we are catering for a number of demands over the marine environment's resources. Colin articulated those really well. The industries that need to use the marine environment, industries such as fishing, production of marine aggregates. We need space for shipping. We need to secure subsea telecommunication cables and electricity interconnection. And there's a growing need for energy infrastructure, such as offshore wind. All while recognising the marine's ecosystems are struggling to be resilient to these demands. So I think we're all acutely mindful of the responsibility to restore and eventually enhance marine's habitats and species. Our ecosystems, the marine and coastal ecosystems, provide us with life-supporting services, food production, climate regulation, clean water. And whilst the marine environment's resilience is vital to support anthropogenic use, again, as we heard from Colin, but we need that for generations to come. At the same time, we're being affected by climate change and other human activities. Achieving net zero and energy security goals is another critical part of the puzzle. A growing need for more offshore wind, for a coordinated electricity grid, how they're connected together to meet all of these aims. And we're looking at our systems to accommodate more and more. And it's the complexity of that system, or the puzzle we're all tasked with putting together. That's the really exciting opportunity for us all. And I really hope we think about that bigger picture today. And it's one that certainly at the Crown Estate we're embracing. So, we are responding to complex demands put upon our seabed. We recognise the need for a more coordinated and structured approach to decisions about its future use. We need to take a more holistic view on the demands of the seabed. And what does that mean in practice? Well, we're undertaking some pioneering work to digitally map the seabed resource to meet future demands and enhance coordination of future activities out to 2050. And we're talking about taking a whole of seabed approach to that. And we can't do that alone. So we're working with partners, and we want to anticipate how demands might develop over time, give us better tools and evidence to articulate together what our shared outcomes are. And we believe this is an essential step to ensure that the UK can scale up renewable energy whilst working towards a thriving marine biodiversity. So you may wonder, some of you are more familiar with us than others, but why are the Crown Estate interested in these varied marine practices and balancing the use of the seabed? So if you'll indulge me, just a tiny bit of history, conscious of time, but just in terms so you're aware of the Crown Estate, we're established by an Act of Parliament, and we are set up to manage a diverse portfolio on behalf of the nation. So we're independent from government, but we sit in a space between public and private sector. And the assets we manage are far-flung and varied. So they range from things like our historic urban landscapes of Regent Street and St James's in London, to some of our most diverse rural landscapes, including large swathes of common land. And in particular of relevance today, we're custodians of almost entire seabed around Wales, England and Northern Ireland. Our core purpose is to create lasting and shared value for the nation. And historically, this would have been defined as financial value. The profit we make year on year, we pay back to Treasury for UK government. And over the past decade, that's meant generating around £3.2 billion worth of revenue for public spending. But in the marine space, our role is far reaching. The seabed is, as we all know, a nationally important asset and sits in the context of a broader marine environment. This means the role we play stretches across unlocking renewable energy for millions of homes through sectors such as wind and creating opportunities for new technologies. So this alternative energy that, Colin's placed in our mind earlier on, like carbon capture and storage and hydrogen to deliver UK's energy security transition. So today, when we consider our purpose to create value, we look at value holistically, including environmental and social value alongside the financial. We know the world is changing rapidly around us. We're facing some of the greatest challenges of our generation. And because of this, the Crown Estate itself is evolving too. So we've got a fundamental responsibility to help address these challenges as part of the systems we operate in. And that's why I reference the pioneering work around digital mapping and also why we invest in data and evidence programme. As you'll well know, I'm sure you're aware, through our formation of OWEC, the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme, we bring together governments, industry, Crown Estate Scotland, regulators and environmental groups to propel the development of offshore wind at pace, but really focusing on those key things that need unlocking, the challenges that we have ahead of us. To date, we've invested around £50 million into the OWEC programme, with that real holistic driver to maintain clean, healthy and biologically diverse seas. And as Dickon said at the outset, my colleague Mandy King, who's with you in the room, OWEC's programme manager, will be covering more detail a little later on this morning. And finally, we continue to grow our online platform. So we have the Marine Data Exchange. It's freely accessible. It contains a whole swathe of offshore survey data. It's the first of its kind to enable evidence-led decision-making. And we celebrated the 10th anniversary this year. So really focusing on how we can drive insights and impact from all of the great data that we have out there. At its heart, robust and accessible data should really help to speed up the consenting process for wind. And what I mean by that is it's about reducing uncertainties, including developers, generating the confidence they need to go on and make the right decisions around where to develop. We want to encourage innovative design, measures to enhance biodiversity and provide a better understanding of the spatial needs of user groups. This data and evidence, along with vital collaboration between everyone here today and beyond, is crucial to ensure we're achieving net zero in lockstep with the needs of our natural environment. Now, I don't know what you were doing 25 years ago. I think I was still at school. But at the same time as that, the UK's offshore wind sector was starting off. And that sector now supports 30,000 jobs and is set to provide enough clean power for almost half of the UK's households by the end of this year. So then we could look ahead to the next 25 years out to 2048, and the world might look really different by then. But I really am certain that being delivered in partnership with everyone here today will be vital in ensuring positive further impact for years to come. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to say hello to you all. I'm so sorry I'm not in the room, but I really wish you a fantastic conference. And I look forward to hearing about the key impact actions you've identified for research, government, industry and ourselves over the coming days. Thank you.
And the bit where we have to actually say yes or no to projects. And so I'm very kind of aware of the importance of the science and the research and how we actually meet those demands that Colin has put in front of us about making decisions and actually kind of getting on with it, guys. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the role of the Scottish Government, what we've got going on at the moment and the teams that we have doing work. So, right, first of all, introductions. Okay, so as I said, my name is Zoe Crutchfield. I'm the head of the licensing operations team. I've got a couple of colleagues here with me. I've got more than a couple of colleagues actually, and I'm going to introduce them. So we are split up in the Scottish Government into two key teams dealing with offshore wind. So we have an offshore wind directorate, and they deal with the kind of supply chain side of things and the planning, and ScotMare, our research and evidence programme. And I'm going to get Rebecca to give you all a wave. So this is Rebecca Young down here, and Rebecca's running that team in charge of the planning and the evidence side of things. And then there's myself, a licensing operations team. Got another colleague here, Jared. Jared will give everyone a wave. Okay, so Jared's our science, evidence, data and digital lead. So these are the people that we work with when we're looking at gathering the science and the information to help us as the licensing team when we're making decisions. And then Jared and his team feed into other research work going on as well. And then Michael's not here, but an important team coming up in this work is our Marine Nature Enhancement programme and the work that they're doing there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So many of you will be familiar with this plan, but or this map chart, but I'll put it up here because actually what we're dealing with in Scotland at the moment is real. Okay, we've got our existing projects. So if you look at the ones in pink, those are the ones that we've been developing since, well, 2009, I think I started working on Nartnaguia, so that's how long it's taken, and Nartnaguia is being built at the moment. And then the orange ones are the ones that we're looking at consent applications at the moment in terms of previous rounds. And then we've got the INTOG, the Innovation and Targeted Oil and Gas round. So those are the kind of blues. And then we've got our ScotWind round, which is the kind of pinky purpley colour. And we've already got applications in, guys, okay? This isn't something that we're thinking about happening in the future. This is on our desk now, and we've got to make decisions now. So we've got the West of Orkney project in, which is to the west of Orkney, you'll be surprised to know. And then we've got the Green Vault one in, which is kind of, for those of you who don't know the northeast, it's like Fraserburgh, so the pointy bit, Fraserburgh and out. Green Vault's one of our INTOG projects. And they're sitting on our desk now. They're going out to consultation. They're going out for additional information. Decision making will be happening in next year. You know, so it's about. My message to you is it's happening. And so what are we doing? So we have the planning team. We're looking at our sectoral marine plans. So we've got a sectoral marine plan ongoing for INTOG, our Innovation Targeted Oil and Gas round. We've got the same thing happening in terms of ScotWind. We had a plan for ScotWind that was issued in 2020. Since then, a lot of new information has come along. We've had new sites and the scale of the sites come forward. So there's an iterative plan review going on on ScotWind at the moment. And one of the things we're thinking about, if required, okay, and I have to say that because we can't predetermine what's going to happen with the conclusions of our IPR, if needed, we are thinking about how we derogate and provide compensation at plan level. So that's how we derogate from the Habitats Directive and how we might be able to compensate for some of these potential impacts at the plan level. So what's the challenge here for us as a group in terms of research going forward? Well, it's all about how we get meaningful assessment at the plan level, how we pull all those assessments together and we really try to actually make them meaningful so that people like Rebecca can actually write a plan that can be adopted and used going forward. Always a challenge, and I mean, I've been working in this field for 25 years now, something like that, you know, and cumulative and in combination. I mean, it rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? We say it every time, you know, how are we doing this? How are we going to make it better? And we are a lot better, guys. We are a lot better than when I started. We are a lot better than the, you know, the work that was done 20, 30 years ago, but it's something that we need to keep developing. The planning needs to inform project level applications and decisions going forward. So I'm looking at my colleagues here and saying to Rebecca, I need a really strong plan with lots of evidence and lots of conclusions and lots of recommendations so that I can use that and my team can use that when we're making decisions and recommendations to the Scottish ministers about what projects are going to go forward. And ultimately what we're trying to do is get the right developments in the right places at the right time. And that's something that is not going to be easy, but it's something that I think, as Colin laid out, it's a challenge that we need to take on and deliver. Oh, and it's happening now, guys, okay? Just so you get that message, it's happening now. It's not something that's happening 4 or 5 years in the future, or, you know, it's now. Okay, so what's our challenges at project level? Well, there's a challenge about how we link that plan level assessment work that Rebecca and the team are doing to our project specific EIAs. How we get that information out there for applicants to use and how we actually use that effectively in the applications put in front of us. So that everyone, all the interested stakeholders, the ministers, the decision makers, the nature conservation bodies, everyone involved actually has a really good understanding of what the potential impacts of projects are. And there's cumulative in combination again. Again, it just rolls off the tongue. We say that every time, but that's always a challenge in individual applications. How do the applicants assess it within their application? And then how do we as decision makers actually use that and make some good decisions based on those cumulative and impact in combination assessments? Uncertainty. Okay, we always talk about uncertainty. We don't understand everything. There's always going to be uncertainty going forward. But one of the challenges for us is managing that. We can't do nothing, okay? We cannot, and maybe that's the next point in my list, is that consents and licenses keep coming, guys. I mean, my team is like a machine. I'd like to say a well-oiled machine, but maybe not quite there yet. But that's what's happening is we keep turning the handle, we keep cranking out the recommendations, the decisions, the marine licenses. That's what we have to do. So we have to deal with the uncertainty that we've got in front of us now. We can't stop. Okay, so that's a big challenge. Coming forward, we've got the changes that have been brought about by the Energy Act. Okay, so that implementing those changes, turning them into statutory instruments, getting them into actual regulation and how we manage that going forward. It's all something new for us. And I think the challenges there are about some of the definitions coming forward. It's about coherence of the network, okay? So moving away from that sort of compensation at site-specific level, moving away to kind of think about how we actually maintain the coherence of the network of species, special protection areas, special areas of conservation, those kind of things. Thinking about additionality, how we're going to manage that. Okay, that's a challenge in the Habitats Directive and the Birds Directive. How we actually manage that and the changes that are coming through the Energy Act that may mean that additionality test is slightly different. Strategic compensation and marine enhancement. So this, I think, is something that Scottish Government are really trying to grapple with. You know, we've got a team that have been set up to look at marine enhancement. What we want to do is get these big win-wins. If we are going to derogate from the Habitats Directive because of potential impacts, we want to make sure that the compensation that's delivered actually means something useful, that it does help the marine environment, that we do something to help the marine environment recover. So all of those things that we talk about, the seabird strategy, marine mammal strategies, all of this work that we could be doing, we want to try to make sure that through the compensation and marine enhancement route, we actually get some of those projects actioned and we start to take some of the bigger picture things into account that we could do and work with our colleagues in the offshore wind industry to deliver those. So we're really looking for win-wins. And you'd be surprised to know, it's now, guys. Okay, again, it's not something that's going to happen 4 or 5 years in the future. This is what we're doing now. And so what we need to do is to really make sure our research is focused and delivered and understandable, and I'll come on to that in a minute. So these slides have been prepared by my science colleagues, so I may be a little vaguer on some of the detail here than on my previous slides. But in terms of our key challenges that we wanted to set out for you, I think in terms of ornithology, we're looking at the impacts that have become about through HPAI. Okay, we need to think about how we're going to deal with that in our impact assessments, in our research, how we think about that if we're looking at adaptive management, for instance. Now, there's a couple of projects listed there that we're already doing. I'm not going to go through these, but we do have a list of all the projects that we've got ongoing that we can talk to you about a bit more in the subgroups. We need to, another key challenge is understanding at-sea distribution and abundance, okay? So this keeps changing. This, you know, what Colin was talking about, the environment keeps changing. You know, we need to make sure that our information is up to date, that we've got this at both the project level and the plan level, and we can keep updating our information and our baselines that we're assessing on. Seabird behaviour at sea, so really thinking about kind of, you know, what are seabirds doing, why are they doing certain actions, where do they go during the breeding, where do they go during non-breeding seasons. Ecosystem dynamics and the impact of offshore wind farms. So, you know, thinking about the kind of impacts that we're having, and some other priority areas are things like quantifying the responses of seabirds to effects. So not only kind of like the turbines, but thinking about vessel movements, construction activities, the whole kind of offshore wind farm itself, and what impacts we're having there, or potential impacts. And then also another key work stream in terms of challenges is the feasibility of delivering a range of compensatory measures for key seabird species. So this goes back to my previous slide where we're thinking about marine enhancement compensation. What can we do that's actually effective to really help our seabirds? And then benthic ecology. Key challenges here are baseline information and impacts of marine renewable energy devices on benthic habitats. And we've got work going on there in terms of looking at monitoring design, looking at passive acoustic monitoring and seeing where that can be usefully used. EMS, one of those things that those of us that have been around a while, it sort of went away, but it's come back again in terms of, you know, something that we really need to think about, especially for these floating projects where you've got cables in the water column more. So, you know, we've got a project at the moment trying to look at characterising EMF from subsea cables and understanding potential impacts, but it's a really difficult area, okay? It's not an easy area to get your head around and to get people involved in the research. Looking at the distribution of ocean quahog, monitoring population dynamics, so that's something quite specific for us in terms of really wanting to understand where those features are. And then other priority challenge areas are invasive non-native species, looking at the risk there. You know, are our offshore wind farm programs going to increase that? How do we manage that? How do we as decision makers and those issuing the consents and licenses, making sure we're doing our best to minimize the risk going forward? And then nature inclusive design. So this goes back to the previous slides I was talking about marine enhancement. What can we do with the design of our wind farms to actually make them so that they are designed to encourage nature, to encourage the best environments, the best habitats out there? And then fish and fisheries. So key challenges at the moment, you know, going through looking at recommendations to design effective monitoring approaches, so both for commercial fisheries and for those fish and shellfish species out there. So really thinking as well about how we link those socioeconomic impacts of changes in commercial fisheries back to our decision making is key for us. Again, looking at EMF, looking at essential fish habitats. You know, this is something for us where traditionally we've got maps of key spawning areas. You know, we need to make sure those are continuously updated, that we really understand where those habitats are, where they're going to move to as the climate changes, what's going to happen to those, and how we can best assess those through our impact assessment and plans going forward. And then other priority areas, underwater noise impacts, that's something that we continue to grapple with. I think, you know, we've got a lot of research going on, but as often research generates questions as well as answers. So that's something we need to persevere with. And fisheries displacement. So I think with the change of scale and the sort of floating projects coming forward, you're looking at a different type of displacement from offshore wind farm sites. So we need to understand that and the knock-on impacts of that. So what's the challenge here for us in the next couple of days? Well, I think in terms of research, I mean, this isn't rocket science, guys, but it's about making the outputs from all these projects we have going on accessible and understandable. You know, I've worked in a lot of different fields around offshore renewables. I've been a nature conservation person. I've been in industry. I've been developing offshore wind farms. I've worked as a consultant, and now I'm a regulator. I'm an engineer by training, okay? I know lots about how to build sewage farms and all those kind of things. That's my background, and how to test metals, okay? So what you need to do is to make this research so that people like me can understand it. You know, it has to be something that me and my team and Rebecca's team and others within the Scottish Government can actually use to make decisions. So making it accessible and understandable, usable by applicants and by decision makers. Think about how it's going to help us to manage uncertainty, okay? Minimize precaution going forward. You know, we want to see, we've got all of these reasons why we want to actually reach our net zero targets. And part of that is getting away from some of the things where we have a really precautionary approach. And then this is something that's kind of like difficult to say sometimes, or for us to manage, but we've really got to accept that our collective understanding will change and develop. We haven't got the right answers all the time. We might not have it right now, but we think, you know, we've got the best available evidence in front of us that we can. But that will change. We will learn. We will keep developing. You know, in 20 years' time, when I'm hopefully retired, a different group of people will be sitting here having different conversations about research. And you have to accept that that's what's going to keep happening. So those are my pleas for the next couple of days. And just to say, as I keep saying at the start, it's happening now, guys. We're making decisions now. Projects are going forward now. So we really need to work out how to get this research out the door as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. We will be inviting you back onto the stage at the end for questions. Yeah, I really liked your messages at the end there. They're really useful. That thing about being able to understand and always learning is really, really important. Without further ado, I'm going to invite Dave Carlin up. Dave is lead marine and fishery scientist at DEFRA, but has similarly been around for longer, almost as long as me. Brilliant. Cheers, Dave.
Thanks, Dickon, for the introduction, and it's great to be here. You'll be pleased to know I've got no slides today, but I do have some notes, which I'll get right here. I was really struck by Dickon's introduction around the conversation that was taking place at least 10 years ago. I've been involved in kind of marine regulatory activities. Great to catch up with Zoe and others today. We've not seen each other for far too long, for 20, 25 years. And that's a perpetual conversation that we've had over that time. How do we bring science? How do we bring policy? How do we bring regulators together? And it's great to see that is happening today. So thank you for being here, and thank you for the opportunity to talk. I'm Dave Carlin. I'm DEFRA's lead marine and fisheries scientist. I lead a team in DEFRA, and our job really is to go out and to commission, to identify, to seek out evidence to inform the policy decisions that DEFRA and other government departments want to take. So it's great actually to have projects like ECOWind, like OWEC, and like some of the other programs that are taking place in this space, because it makes our job so much easier. You've got access to that information, you've got access to that relevant science and evidence outputs that we can effectively hoover up and use in the policy making that we have to do. So having access to the outputs from this work is really fundamentally important to how we operate and how we want to take forward government policy. Government policy, good government policy, is made on good evidence. Whether that's scientific evidence, whether that's data, whether that's new knowledge, whether that's economic analysis, social research, or better still, a combination of all of the above. So I think one of the key challenges from a government perspective is how do programs bring all of those different ways of looking at evidence, the evidence base, together to help us to then implement those approaches to policy. And I think here in the conversations that we're having and we'll have over the next couple of days, I think it'd be really important to try and reflect on all of those different aspects of the evidence base and how they interact and how they come together to solve some of these sort of really important societal challenges. Talking of policy, we've got a really ambitious policy agenda within in DEFRA for our marine environment. Our sort of focus is on having a healthy, clean, safe, biodiverse and productive seas and oceans for the UK. And nested under that, we've got things like the Environment Act, the Fisheries Act, the 25-year Environment Plan, and the Environment Improvement Plan. And all of those are hugely important to meeting that ambition for healthy, biodiverse and productive seas. And the work that's been produced through programs like ECOWind are really important in helping not just deliver offshore wind and clean energy, but helping to support and inform those other areas of policy that we're actively developing and taking forward. So the work that's been produced isn't just relevant, as I say, to offshore wind or offshore energy, but actually it's going to help us with fisheries management plans. It's going to help us with marine protected areas and highly protected marine areas and how we roll those out over the coming years. It's going to help, it's already been mentioned, with marine net gain. We have a programme, the Marine Natural Capital Ecosystem Assessment Programme, where we're trying to look at a different way of evaluating, if you like, the marine environment through more of an economic lens. And again, the work that you guys are going to be taking forward will be hugely important to helping shape how we take that approach forward as well. And also longer term, we're in the process of reforming the UK marine strategy at the moment. So again, some of the additive value that the programmes that you're taking forward under ECOWind and OWEC will have that additive value that moves into helping us with that reform programme and helping us understand the quality and the health of the marine environment into the future. There are a few DEFRA people here today, so I've got Emma and Chris from my team on the middle table. We've also got my colleague Ian, who'll be joining us. I don't know if Ian's here already, but he'll certainly be joining us for giving a talk tomorrow on more of the sort of policy-specific aspects of DEFRA's interest in the programme. But as I say, there's a whole range of different areas where your work will directly influence the policy that we're looking to make. In terms of marine habitats, we're seeing increased activity, spatial use of our marine environment. It's the same in relation to fisheries, and I think Zoe mentioned displacement as being a sort of key area of interest for DEFRA kind of moving forward. And increasingly that will be, a key priority for us, how we understand the shifting patterns of fishing activity, the opportunities as they change over time for the fishing community and the fishing sector as a result of offshore wind and offshore energy rollout, but also how we balance those different opportunities together. So this whole idea of displacement, but in the context of cumulative and in combination effects, is incredibly important to us. We've got ambitions as a government to have greater protection of our marine environment. As I mentioned earlier, healthy, biodiverse, productive seas is really key to government policy in our seas and oceans at the moment. And to be able to protect areas and create those opportunities for trade-offs between how we use the marine environment and how we harvest energy, how we fish, how we use the marine environment for all sorts of different purposes, but also how we protect it in the longer term is really important. And I think a key area for us is to understand some of those trade-offs that we need to start to consider and try and understand some of the balance that we have to strike in that space to try and achieve all of these ambitious outcomes. Coastal communities is hugely important to government as well. I don't think it's been mentioned yet, but we see huge deprivation in coastal communities, many coastal communities around the coast, and there are opportunities here through the rollout of offshore energy, through better spatial management, through better integration of different activities, to use this as an opportunity not just to achieve net zero ambitions, but also to help improve and enhance those coastal communities and coastal economies. So I think that's another area that we'd lay out as part of the challenge for ECOWind and OWEC is how can you contribute to that sort of broader set of challenges. Spatial squeeze I've mentioned, and the implication of displacement, but again, sort of assessment of how that spatial squeeze affects economies, affects industries, affects the communities that use those resources is important to us as well, and I think is something that warrants further attention. And kind of moving more into programs that that OWEC and ECOWind are delivering, BOWE is going to be critically important to us in addressing some of the evidence gaps we've got in terms of interactions of infrastructure in the offshore environment. It's going to be hugely beneficial to help us look at those long-term effects from climate change alongside other anthropogenic impacts. Looking at this idea of cumulative in combination effects and additive value is incredibly important to us. Innovation in the way that we monitor the marine environment, again, is critical. We have a large programme under our Marine Natural Capital programme looking at innovative data and how we can bring different monitoring programmes together and how we can start to think about applying things like AI into that space. And I think you guys have a real role to play in shaping that and taking it forward as well. And I know there are lots of initiatives taking place, the future of marine research infrastructure programme, for instance, that are taking place in this space. And I think it's really important to ensure that we've got proper join up and proper tie up between these programmes. And I think the people in the room here today, the people online, are the right people to start to kind of bring those conversations together. The Accelerate programme, again, is going to be really important in terms of understanding habitat change and particularly, again, those seabed interactions and how they will develop and modify and change over time as a result of the rollout of offshore wind, as the result of the displacement activity that I've mentioned as well. We're really interested in seabirds, and I haven't prepared slides, but Zoe's slides summed up pretty much our interest as well from a DEFRA point of view. You know, we've got problems with seabirds at the moment. We've got concerns around population change, and as a result of some of the work that needs to be done in this space, we're going to have to make some really hard choices, I think, around where we can roll out sort of offshore development, where we can balance that need for nature conservation as well. And certainly Parliament are very interested in that, in seabirds as well. And we have the seabird programme that has sort of rolled out as a result of the EFRA committee interest in seabird population, seabird change. So, I mean, I'll probably pause at this point. I'm very happy to sort of take questions during the panel session. But the point I was trying to make today really is the work that you guys are involved in, the work that will come from these programmes, is not just important to the rollout of offshore energy. Actually, we see huge value in it in supporting a whole range of different areas of government policy and government interest. I think critical to that is integration. Critical to that is collaboration and cooperation. And as Zoe mentioned at the end of her talk, this idea of making that readily accessible, readily communicated to policymakers and ultimately to ministers who will need to balance up a whole range of different factors when they make decisions on the rollout of different types of activity, the rollout of offshore energy and the like. My team can help in that. Our job really is to synthesize the science, turn it into policy relevant and ministerial relevant submissions, if you like. I think there's a real role for those people who work in that sort of translational space between the academic science, the pure science, the applied science, and ultimately in terms of that decision-making spectrum. And I think, you know, it's important, essential, actually, that we can all come together using those different skill sets, bring them together to create those really compelling recommendations to ministers to move things forward and achieve our net zero ambitions. So I'll pause at that point, but yeah, I'm very happy to take questions during the panel session. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think you might have won back the time that Colin stole from you, so that's extra helpful as well. Thank you. So next up, we've got a double act. We've got Jonathan Abbott, who's Offshore Development Strategy Manager at SSE Renewables, and after Jonathan, Cartwright Stevens, who's the Offshore Wind Industry Council Strategic Compensation Programme Manager. Jonathan, over to you first.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm John Abbott from SSE Renewables. I'm the Offshore Development Strategy Manager. Years. So by 2030, if we continue on our current trajectory, we will reach 1.5 degrees. So there is, I think it's unquestionable, and it's a point raised by many of the speakers so far, we are in a position of extreme urgency. We need to do things now. This sense of urgency is translated into the UK government's targets for offshore wind. So the offshore wind industry must form the backbone of our low carbon energy system. And that ambition has increased from 30 gigawatts per year to 40 gigawatts per year to 50 gigawatts per year, and full decarbonisation of the electricity system by 2035. And that is essential not only in and of itself, but to facilitate the decarbonisation of other really hard to decarbonise sectors, heat and transport. And the investment needed in offshore wind is vital to ensure a just transition from the oil and gas sector as we move towards net zero. So what does that mean in terms of the pipeline that we can see in front of ourselves? What are practical applications of that? What it means is that all the projects that are consented, all the projects that are currently in planning, and 6.5 gigawatts of projects which haven't even yet submitted an application, all need to be consented, all need to be built, all need to be operational in the next 6 years. That's a very significant challenge. Looking forward to 2050, to achieve a balanced pathway, we need to get into the sea approximately, well, between 95 and 115 gigawatts of offshore wind. The key point is most of those sites have already been identified and are already in place. So the question is, how do we deliver all of this offshore wind and achieve good environmental status? As I say, that's a significant challenge. The Offshore Wind Acceleration Task Force prepared a report which came out in March 2023, and that identified 6 key challenges to deliver this ambition. First of all, we need a revenue support system which provides fair and equitable support to offshore wind, which will allow this pipeline to be delivered in time and at speed. We need significant investment in the ports and supply chain to make sure that they can be delivered in time and are in the right place to deliver this offshore wind that we need. And the Scottish and UK governments are as they need to. And I think looking at that consenting issue, there are probably three underlying principles, three underlying issues which are making this such a difficult problem to crack. And those three things are how we manage and address uncertainty, how we deal with precaution and the application of the precautionary principle, and how we apply an ecosystem approach. So I think these are the three key challenges really that I will put out to you as an academic group. And from our perspective, these underlying principles are what's causing the blockages within our consenting process. So in terms of uncertainty, the risk associated with uncertainty is one of the key issues in decision making. The current approach, I guess from our perspective, appears to be that the approach, given the criticality of uncertainty, is to reduce that uncertainty through research programs. And that's a reasonable approach. But I think hopefully we've made the case that we simply don't have time now to develop those really well-researched, well-evidenced and agreed evidence bases that the majority of stakeholders will agree with. And so we need to move towards a situation where we are understanding the risk associated with uncertainty, and we're putting in place measures and management actions to manage that uncertainty rather than trying to reduce it. I think that's a fundamental point. The precautionary principle triggers offshore wind farm developers, and it's really quite a challenging thing to deal with. There's a real lack of definition. There's a range of interpretations as to how this should be applied. We've got hard interpretations and soft interpretations. So a hard interpretation of the precautionary principle that is often replayed to us: if there's uncertainty, then the project can't progress. And that leads us down a dead end. A softer interpretation is one where we say there is uncertainty, we need to understand that risk, and we need to put in place appropriate measures to manage that uncertainty effectively. And I think that is the interpretation of the precautionary principle that we should be moving towards. Given the twinned crisis of climate and biodiversity, I think that softer approach, or that softer interpretation of the precautionary principle, is the only one that's going to be effective. And then my final point, before I hand over to Kat to talk about the more specific measures that we're putting in place, is adopting an ecosystem approach to how we move forward. So currently, a real focus is on the impacts of offshore wind farms and how we compensate for those impacts. But in order for us to generate solutions, effective solutions, which deliver good environmental status, deliver net zero, we have to think about the collective pressures of human activities. So those are my three challenges. Those are the three challenges from the OWEC developer group to this meeting. How do we manage and deal with uncertainty more effectively? How should we interpret and apply the precautionary principle? And how should we use and make the best use of the ecosystem approach to deliver the outcomes that we need? Thank you. I'll hand over to Kat for the next part of the speech.
Thanks very much, John. So I'm Kat Rout-Stevens. I'm the Strategic Compensation Programme Manager at the Offshore Wind Industry Council within the Pathways to Growth team that's headed up by Rachel Mills. And we're looking at the environmental and consenting challenges that are facing the offshore wind sector and really how we can move forward and address those barriers to achieve the offshore wind targets that we've got in the UK and ultimately moving towards net zero as well. So who are we? The Offshore Wind Industry Council. We're a senior level government and industry partnership that was set up originally to deliver the offshore wind sector deal, which came in 2019. And our focus is shifting again with the publication of Tim Pick, the Offshore Wind Champions report back in March this year, as John mentioned, to really focus on the recommendations that he's put within that report to work collaboratively with government to deliver those. we've got several different work streams, and these build on the areas of challenge that John mentioned. So we've got things like looking at supply chain, grid connections, aviation and radar. But like I said, this Pathways to Growth work stream is the one that's really looking to push forward on the environmental and consenting challenges. Okay, so within Pathways to Growth, we came up with a coordination group which has many of the regulators, statutory nature conservation bodies across the UK and industry in that forum, with 10 prioritised barriers, looking at what the key challenges were around the consenting issues. So these are the ones just on the screen here, and these were prioritised back in February 2022. Now, a lot has happened since they were originally developed, and we've got roadmaps on how we can look to be closing out those barriers. They're on our website. And lots has happened. We've had the publication of the British Energy Security Strategy, lots of research programmes have been implemented. So things have shifted slightly. So we're going through a process at the moment to refresh and recalibrate what those priorities are, where things have moved, where things haven't. And it's been quite an interesting process over the summer, and we're just coming to the end of this now, and we'll have the new published roadmaps in a couple of weeks, I think, with agreement from the coordination group. But these are some of the initial findings that we're seeing. And we're seeing that some of these original barriers are considered lower priority than they were 18 months, 2 years ago. It's not to say that they're not still issues. I think it's demonstrating that there's work going on in these areas. So for example, resources. We know resourcing is a really key issue across the whole offshore wind sector. I think it's fair to say probably wider than just the offshore wind sector, and definitely wider than consenting as well. But we know there's other things that maybe need to be looked at the same time. Interestingly, underwater noise. Now, I would think this is probably a higher priority, but it's coming out as probably one of our least prioritised areas. But again, I think that demonstrates that there's lots of work going on in this area. So how can we then use this work to change how we do things and actually enable development to go forward? I think the interesting ones is if we look at what are the high priority areas that we're still focused on within Pathways to Growth. And derogations and compensation remains the top issue that we're trying to grapple with. I think a lot of this goes back to what's been said in every single presentation so far, is how we deal with that uncertainty. How do we know what effects might arise from these projects, and then what compensation might be suitable for those sorts of impacts. So that's where we need more evidence and research, but we need to do it in a way that enables development to happen at the same time. So I'm sure lots of discussion will come up around that today. Marine spatial planning, this has risen to number 2. And again, there's lots of work going on in this area, but I think it's become increasingly important that we have comprehensive marine plans in place. And going back to what Zoe was saying around looking at where we've got that new data and evidence to inform those plans, and then how that translates back down to project levels as well. And then I'll just mention 2 others. I'll caveat all of this with this is going through a process at the moment, so they might not be the final priority areas, and the names might change slightly, but I think it gives a good indication where we are. The last 2 on the list here, so adopting evidence and strategic approach to data. This is really fundamental, I think, for the next 2 days here. It's how we use that data and evidence in the most effective way to change how we address implementing renewable technology in the most sustainable way. The clock's just changed from 10 minutes to 1, so I will carry on. So in terms of some of the short-term barriers and how the research can be looking to address them, and I've touched on a few of these things already. So if we're looking at derogations, ornithology and benthic impacts, how do we address those sorts of things in there? resourcing across the sector. How do we get more people involved in this? And that includes the academic side as well. And then adopting that evidence into guidance and decision making. We really need guidance in place to help us move forward and all have a collective understanding of what we're working towards. And then finally, in the medium to long term, what are the opportunities and risks associated with research and where those opportunities can be realised? The marine spatial planning aspect is really key. Again, we've got quite a significant amount of offshore wind that's in the pipeline. We know where that's going to go, but we've got this additional piece as well. So how do we fit all these activities in the sea, as well as the cables as well? We've got the targets around marine protected areas and biodiversity targets as well. So combining those things together, and the future development of floating technology as well, maybe in different areas than we've historically seen with fixed bottom offshore wind. In the policy landscape, we're seeing a lot of change in this area, a lot of change quite quickly as well, particularly over the last year with the introduction of the Energy Act and the Levelling Up and Regenerations Act as well. So that there's lots of things there that are changing how we do things. And again, that strategic data, and I think this might be a theme as well for today, is how we move to a strategic approach to monitoring and data collection and analysis of that data as well. And adaptive management and compensation, which I could talk all day about, but time is up. So happy to take questions on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you for adapting on the fly there when we got the timer wrong. Much appreciated. So last but not least, we've got Mandy King, who is the OWEC Programme Manager at the Crown Estate. After Mandy's given a talk, I'm going to invite all the other speakers up to the front here, and then we'll have 15 minutes of questions. So, Mandy.
Right, hello, good morning everybody. Mandy King, delighted to be here. Do I need to press this button to make my slides appear?
The green one. If you
the
press
basics.
the green, yeah, basics. There you go.
Right, thank you. Should have checked that first. Right, so do I have a minus amount of time to speak now? I think possibly. I work for the Crown Estate and I head up the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme. And I'm absolutely delighted to be here today at our first joint OWEC and ECOWind annual impact meeting. With the title Annual, I'm very much hoping that this is going to be the first of many. Today, I'd like to take the opportunity to build on Liv Thomas's presentation and provide some context as to the Crown Estate, what it is and why it's involved in this programme. I also want to explain why collaboration and research in this area really, really matters, and why, if anyone doesn't need convincing any further, it's absolutely imperative to help address some of the existential global challenges that we face. And a spoiler alert, having seen everyone else's key challenge areas, I've taken a very high-level approach to this. So first off, the Crown Estate. So I was just thinking that perhaps not everyone knows who the Crown Estate is or what it is, and that it's perhaps a bit odd to be seeing people, in fact, two speakers from an organisation called the Crown Estate at a research conference. So I thought it would be helpful to provide a bit of context, because the Crown Estate is quite an odd organisation. And I often get asked by family and friends, oh, you know, do you work for the King then? You know, with the Crown title. So I thought it'd be helpful to give a little bit of history on why the Crown Estate is here today and why the Crown Estate cares about those challenges. So in 1760, King George III handed over land and property to the government to be managed in perpetuity for the nation. And with the net revenue profit from those assets going back into government coffers. Rumour has it that this was to stop him and future generations gambling away the nation's assets, but I couldn't possibly comment on that. The Crown Estate in its current form was established in 1961, and it was established as an independent commercial business to manage those assets. But perhaps been a little bit unfair in saying odd, perhaps unique might be a better word. So we have a CEO and we have a board who oversee what we do, what happens at the Crown Estate, but we don't have shareholders who are looking for a profit. So we don't have that kind of short-term shareholder kind of attitude, and we're not answerable to government ministers, although we do need to return profit to Treasury. So we're actually commercial, we're independent, and we're on that kind of cusp of public and private. And what that means that we are able to do is to make targeted investments in our assets. And the OWEC programme and the ECOWind programme is one of those targeted investments. So we're not a research body per se, and we're not actually a charity. We can't give money to things because they are good things. It's very much tied into the enhancements and increasing value of assets, and hence the real importance of impact of this programme. So I'm now going to go on a little bit to our role in the marine environment. So some of you may be aware that the Crown Estate leases the seabed for offshore wind and generates income from this leasing. It also conducts leasing and issues licenses for a whole range of other coastal and offshore activities. So some of those are listed here. So for example, it issues leasing for dredging for aggregates. Again, something you may or may not be aware of, but we don't issue leases and licenses for everything on the seabed, and I'm absolutely not going to get into the detail of it, but really suffice to say that, we're not responsible for oil and gas leasing, we're not responsible for fishing, and Crown Estate Scotland is a separate commercial entity that runs separate leasing in Scotland. Our two most recent leasing rounds are mentioned here. Leasing round 4 and round 5. We're probably rather unimaginative in our titling of the leasing rounds. But to give, an idea of kind of like scale and where we are so far in leasing, we've been doing this since 2000 for offshore wind. We've awarded leasing rights for 33 gigawatts of offshore wind. And the UK target is for 50 gigawatts. That's 50 gigawatts installed by 2030. So sort of speaking, I suppose, kind of thinking back to previous kind of comments about the extent of the offshore wind pipeline, the ambition for offshore wind, and points I know sort of Zoe was making around it's happening now very much. So challenge areas, as I mentioned, kind of extremely high level challenges that I put here. And these are challenges for us all. For the Crown Estate, as a responsible landlord and steward of the marine environment, we can't be offering up areas of seabed for offshore wind development without understanding the consequences of those decisions and wrestling with these twin challenges that I've put here and which others have spoken, I'm sure, far more eloquently than I can on. So, that's to say the deployment decision makers, not just the Crown Estate in leasing, but also Zoe, her team and others. How can that be best communicated? Over here as well, and my presentation was titled A Crown Estate Perspective. The following is completely my perspective, I'll own under that. And I've put compounded by. I think it's really important to understand the context. And in the UK, we have a very particular set of circumstances that we find ourselves in. So we don't have a single decision maker or a single UK-wide plan for offshore wind and the marine environment. I'm saying that boldly, hoping no one jumps up and says, actually we do, but I don't see it. Do Scotland, but not mine. And many of you here will work for different governments, environments, regulators who have some role in offshore wind planning, policy, licensing and consenting. And I make no judgment on that structure. Suffice to say there is a complexity there in terms of number of organisations. I imagine if I was an academic doing some research and I'm thinking, right, I want to influence a decision maker, and trying to work out who that is and what decisions is not straightforward. We also have a national infrastructure consenting system, which is very much has been set up and geared towards terrestrial projects with localised impacts, and looks at them somewhat individually on a first come, first served basis. Slightly different in Scotland with section 36 of the Electricity Act. But again, projects are coming in now, project by project, decisions are needing to be made. And finally, competing demands for sea space, not just offshore wind nature, but fishing, navigation. MOD have interests in offshore carbon capture and underground storage. It's hugely busy. So where does Crown Estate want to be in this, and where does it see itself? Our CEO, Dan Labbard, speaks a lot about purpose. One of the first things that he did when he joined the organisation about 4 years ago was to set a new purpose for the business, which is to create lasting and shared prosperity for the nation. And he's talked quite widely about this, not just to the team, his employees, but also publicly and externally, and being very clear that by prosperity, he doesn't mean finance, and that he does mean social, environmental and economic value. And this is for the nation in the long term. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the Crown Estate being an odd or rather unique organisation, which he has taken a big pay cut to join, because he sees the possibility in being able to act in a way that perhaps others can't. So it's not just about cash to Treasury in the short term. And more recently, we've launched our marine strategy, which sets out the following, and just draw your attention to the top 3 things there, being world-leading digital data and insights organisation, the investments that can be made to unlock the potential of the seabed, and creating a delivery route map for whole of seabed. My colleague Tristan Bromley is going to be speaking on this whole of seabed map tomorrow. This means very much that we're taking a proactive role. We're already investing in data and evidence, and there's some examples listed on the slide. We're keen to convene and to collaborate and have a long-term perspective on what we do, with a real focus on sustainability. So I've just got a kind of couple of examples now. I know OWEC, the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme, has been name-checked. There's a handout on reception I brought along, so I can keep this slide extremely short. Suffice to say, it's a £50 million investment intent. There's a mission statement that's been agreed with DEF and DESNES. The programme is delivered jointly with government and with a programme steering group of some 27 organisations. It's through the OWEC programme that we're making a contribution to ECOWind, and also more recently to EcoFlow, a new floating offshore wind research programme, which is to be launched next year. So that's really exciting. Second thing I'm going to mention is the Marine Data Exchange. For those who aren't already aware, this is a long-standing commitment to open source data. So all seabed leases contain clauses requiring data to be shared publicly on the Marine Data Exchange. It's free. All OWEC ECOWind reports and some of the data will be published here. And I want to draw attention to my colleague Chelsea Bradbury, who's in the audience. Put your hand up, Chelsea, over there. Chelsea heads up the MDE, the Marine Data Exchange. So if you want to know any more about that, ask Chelsea. And Chelsea has made fantastic strides to improve the usability of the MDE with ambitions to do more in future. So finally, I just want to explain why Crown Estate is investing in ECOWind. And that's because we recognise the importance of harnessing the brain power of all of you great scientists, leading edge researchers in this challenge, because we can't do this without you. We recognise the importance of developing long-term relationships with government and with industry on these challenges. We know we can't do this alone. Do recognise, going back to previous point, the importance of a whole ecosystems approach on this rather than project by project surveys. And I don't think that anyone was really doing this sort of thing at scale, particularly before OWEC and ECOWind. So it's a fantastic opportunity. And I believe that the only way that we're going to have the policy ready science for decision makers to meet those twin challenges, which I put on earlier, is for us all to work together on this in terms of meeting net zero, tackling marine biodiversity. So with 4 seconds to go, I'm just going to leave you my final slide before we go on to Q&A. How can we continue to make this work impactful so it does achieve all the very grand things that we know it can? Thank you. Ready? Yeah.
Great. If I can invite the other speakers up to the stage, I think we're going to eat 5 minutes into break time. I know you all want coffee, but we have 15 minutes for questions. So for the speakers, I'm going to leave that up there actually. For the speakers, please be aware that when you're talking, please speak into a microphone. For those of you in the room that have got any questions, please speak into a microphone so that people online can hear. People who are online, if you have questions, then please put them in the chat and Paul will let me know. I'm going to go to the room first. Has anyone got a question? Yes, over there. Yes, if we go here first, and we'll go to Matthew at the back. Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks. My name is Raymond Hall. I'm from the Scottish Whitefish Producers Association. This is a question for Zoe. Apologies, Zoe. You touched upon the cumulative and combination effects in your presentation. Could you maybe expand on this? And you said that it's been improving. Could you give an example how this has improved since round 3 until Scotland? Thanks.
I kind of deliberately didn't talk too much about cumulative effects because it's tomorrow's kind of surprise. No, that's not quite the right phrase. I mean, I think the how we deal with seabirds is a really good example of how we've learned to look at the cumulative effects on seabirds in a more coordinated and combined way. You know, when I started out doing offshore wind farm developments, when Dave and I were young and enthusiastic, you know, back in sort of 2000 was the first sort of projects we looked at. And we looked at things very separately there in terms of our impact on seabirds. You know, we didn't have a lot of models, we didn't have a lot of information. It was all very kind of piecemeal assessments. And then over the years, I think we've built up the way we do those assessments. We've tried different routes. You know, some things haven't worked, some things have worked better than others. And now, and I think, I won't go into detail, but, you know, we're now getting to the point when we've got more integrated models. We've got our cumulative effects framework, which will give you a bit more of an update on tomorrow. We've got the work being done through PAIRD, other research projects coming out. So you know, I think that's a very positive example of where our learnings changed and developed over 20 years. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Zoe. And keep those thoughts, Ray. We've got the session on fish and fisheries this afternoon as well, where we can continue those discussions. Matthew.
Thanks, Stephen. And thanks to the panel for setting out really clearly the challenges from the policy and decision makers. Sorry, Matthew Palmer, Plymouth Marine Laboratories. So the question I had really was, I had a number of people calling for accessible, understandable knowledge and tools, and things that are actually going to last beyond the time frame of this relatively short term and relatively low level of investment, if we consider the amounts of money involved with this industry. But there doesn't appear to be any UK coordination. I think Mandy pointed this out in her last talk there. There's no sort of UK coordinating body that brings this together. Obviously, many of us are familiar with and are engaged with the Marine Science Coordinating Committee that was dissolved a couple of years back. I just wondered if the panel had views on what the step forward is in that space. There's obviously a call from your end for better coordination, something to actually provide legacy to these investments in understanding, in evidence. But we'll all walk away after the funding runs out and move on to our next research opportunities or challenges. Where do you see yourselves? What role can you guys play in actually ensuring that there is legacy to these programs, and where can you bring the top-down requirement, that the power, if you like, to ensure that there is coordination across UK communities?
Good question, Matthew. I'm going to go to David first, and then Mandy, I think, some of the OWEC stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Really good question. I think certainly from my experience, where that coordination works best is where you have a sector-driven sort of coordination mechanism, if you like. So where industries come together, and the example I'll use is the marine aggregate sector. Zoe and I worked on this, 20 odd years ago now as well, and others in the room. And what worked really well in that space is government were able to offer a bit of money. Industry were able to come together with government, with regulators, with policymakers, and with the academic community to create, something bigger than the sum of its parts, arguably. And that worked really well because that coordination was happening at all levels within that sort of set of relationships. So I would very much encourage this to be really sector driven, and I think sessions like today and tomorrow and other kind of events like this, and there are lots of other projects like Supergen and others that are looking at different aspects. I think they are the mechanism, if you like, to create that sort of coordination. It's a different sort of footing, if you like, is a different foundation for that collaboration and cooperation. But I think this is a really good way of making that happen. Certainly from a DEFRA perspective, we're acutely aware of the need to create platforms for the marine science community and government to come together more closely, and it's something I'm working on at the moment. But I do think there's a part to play for the sector, for industry, and for that academic community to create some of those platforms as well.
Thank you, David. Mandy, I don't know if you want to say something on OWEC, and then I might just ask for a view from either Kat or John.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Yeah, so in terms of where I see the Crown Estate's role about what we can do and what we can't do. First is we've created a digital platform to share some of the many tools which you will be creating. So in terms of hosting information, hosting tools centrally, we can provide that role. I'd also suggest that we have the ability to convene and coordinate and bring together different organisations. And we set up the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme to be a UK-wide group, despite the fact, those of you who remember my presentation, the Crown Estate's commercial assets don't include Scotland. So we can have that convening role. What I think we can't do is kind of be making representations to different governments about how they might be structured. That would be something we'd step back and say, that's not for us. but certainly we can bring people together and we can host information and we can share information.
Great, thanks, Mandy.
Excellent. I think if I can just add, I think we're seeing that the offshore wind sector is really coming together to try and tackle these challenges, particularly through the Pathways to Growth work stream. We've got a whole range of different developers collaborating to try and tackle these issues. We need to remember there is a competitive environment that they're working in to get these commercial projects up and running. I think in terms of the lasting impacts around this research, that's being undertaken and has been undertaken. There's work within the Crown Estate looking at setting up the offshore wind evidence. Oh, which one is it? Offshore wind knowledge hub, or it's called the OWEC, but that will be, it should be the central location for where this evidence and research is kept, synthesized, or like pointed towards, and then that can be used in decision making, policy development. So that's where this collective understanding is, and hopefully with that long-term vision as well. I think just building on the point that David made around learning from the aggregate sector, we are engaging with the aggregate sector quite a lot, particularly around their regional seabed monitoring approach and how that worked in practice and the lessons that offshore wind can learn from that. I think, like I think all of us said in our presentations, it's not just offshore wind that's happening at sea. We have got different industries working as well. So we need to move to a place where we're looking at that ecosystem approach and how we can bring it all together. And I don't have an answer for that.
Thanks, Kat. And what I would add to that, from a NERC perspective, I guess speaking as the champion of the ECOWind programme, is that there is also an onus on the NERC community to engage in events like today to make sure that we can do that coordination. We currently have got 6 projects here that are all £1 million, £2 million plus. There are 3 or 4 projects of a similar scale that have just been commissioned by the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change programme. We've got the EcoFlow programme coming, which is going to be 3 or 4 additional projects. So we're going to quite quickly get to 10, 11, 12, 13 projects that are all significant and operating offshore, and making sure they're all coordinating together is going to take work from all of us, I think. No easy answer, I'm afraid, Matthew. We've probably got time for one more question from the room or online. Yes, sorry, down the front here.
Thanks. John Green from University of Liverpool. I was really interested by what John said about the precautionary principle. And I've been thinking about that a lot. You know, I'm an ornithologist, and seabirds and benthic habitats are really well protected by legislation. So, you know, kind of a no detriment is the baseline position. That contrasts with other industries in the oceans, so fishing being the obvious one, where we reduce populations deliberately, but we make a decision that that's okay because there's livelihoods, there's source of food, blah, blah, blah. You know, is it time to at least consider revisiting the protections given to some of our ecosystems in order to get the benefits of reducing emissions rapidly, as was talked about earlier? Whereas the social science and the broader societal research to understand whether those are things to revisit, and is that something that any of the panel are interested in commenting on?
What a good question. I'm going to go to John first, and then I might ask Zoe and David if they want to comment on that as well.
I think the issue is with the interpretation and the application of the precautionary principle. So I think one of the key, because it's not clearly defined and people interpret it in a different way. And so the way in which it's commonly interpreted by some of the key stakeholders, that if there is uncertainty about the effects, then what you're proposing shouldn't proceed. And so I think we need to, and I think this is a really good forum for that discussion, is that actually, in effect, ends up defeating itself. Because if we can't proceed with some of these projects around offshore wind, which their primary function, one of their primary outputs is to protect the environment, and if they don't proceed, then we end up causing more damage than we try to prevent. So I think it's a very difficult and complicated issue to explore, but I think we need to look at a softer interpretation of that, which is how the EU defines it and applies it. that you understand the risk around the uncertainty that you're proposing, and you put in place appropriate measures to manage that risk. And so I think that if you take that softer interpretation of the precautionary principle and you apply that to some of the decisions that we're making, then you can deliver both. You can deliver net zero, you can deliver offshore wind, but it gives you the facility to put in place wider measures to deliver these other social impacts. So I think presenting it as a conflict between offshore wind and biodiversity is a false dichotomy. I think it's a false argument. We can do both, but I think we're constrained in terms of making optimal decisions by the regulatory framework and how we define some of these principles. So I think solutions are possible, but we need to stretch our regulatory, legal, scientific imagination to enable us to put in place those solutions.
Thanks, John. And just very briefly, Zoe, I don't know if you've got, Zoe or David, whether you've got anything you want to add to.
Again, I mean, I'll touch on this a bit more tomorrow when we look at cumulatives. I mean, I think one of the things we have is we've got a myriad of policies out there, okay? So people like myself, Rebecca doing the iterative plan review, ScotWind. Scottish Government have got lots of different policies. We want everything. We want biodiversity, we want net zero, we want a just transition to net zero, we want, there are numerous policies out there, and there's a balance there somewhere. Okay, and it's finding that balance, and that's the difficult bit for everyone involved. It's the social, it's the environmental, it's the economic balance, and somewhere there's a sweet spot. I suspect that we all think it's in a different place. Okay, and that's the difficulty. So that would be my thought there. But I'll talk a bit more about all the different policies tomorrow.
Yeah. Very briefly, David, if you could,
Yeah, I think trade-offs is the key here. So I think it's been able to articulate what those trade-offs might be. I agree. I think we can probably have both in terms of conservation and in terms of development. But I think it's articulating those trade-offs. Your question was specifically or included social sciences and social research. And speaking from a natural science background, it's my background, but I actually lead a team that has social researchers and economists in there. It's hugely important, and I think it is a large gap that we currently have in the narrative around understanding the impacts of offshore energy. We do need to do more in that kind of social research, that economic analysis space, and that helps us to then articulate those trade-offs, because ultimately, a minister needs to make a decision. Is it fish? Is it wind? Is it nature conservation? And we have to be able to articulate what the consequences of that decision are.
Great, thank you, David.